The galaxy had learned to fear humanity, but not in the way anyone expected. While most civilizations bowed before the Krethix dominion, and their reputation as apex hunters who had conquered hundreds of worlds, humans had earned a different kind of reputation entirely. Commander Lisa Grant stood in the command center of the exploration vessel Horizon's Edge and stared at the data screen showing another disappearance. 3 more Krethix hunting ships had gone silent in the Outer Rim territories over the past month. The Galactic Council called it a mystery. Lisa called it a pattern she had been tracking for months now. For 3 years she had studied the Krethix from a safe distance and learned everything about them. They were 8 feet tall with reptilian features and scales that could deflect most energy weapons. They valued the hunt above everything else in their culture. They hunted sentient species for sport and mounted their kills as trophies in great halls across their home worlds. They believed themselves unstoppable, and for thousands of years no one had proven them wrong. But something had changed in recent months, and Lisa wanted to know what. The pattern was clear to anyone who looked closely enough. Krethix hunting parties would enter forbidden zones where primitive species lived under Galactic Council protection. They would hunt these defenseless people for weeks and then return home with their trophies. But lately the hunting parties never made it home. Their ships were found drifting in space with crews missing and no signs of struggle. The only clue left behind were strange markings carved into the walls and control panels. Lisa had assembled a team of 5 specialists for this investigation. Paul Henderson was a xenobiologist who understood how predator species thought and behaved. Karen Mitchell was a weapons expert who could identify any tool or weapon from the smallest fragment. Greg Palmer was the best pilot in the human fleet, with reflexes that bordered on supernatural. Nicole Barnes was a communications officer who spoke 47 languages, including several predator dialects. Danny Cooper was a young engineer fresh out of academy, but his talent for understanding complex systems was unmatched. They gathered in the briefing room as Lisa displayed the latest data. The most recent disappearance was a Krethix vessel called the Bloodwing, commanded by a hunter named Varkesh. His ship had been found 3 days ago near a protected world inhabited by a species called the Pelthorans. The Pelthorans were peaceful and had no space travel technology. They should have been safe under Council law, but the Krethix ignored such laws regularly. Paul studied the images from the Bloodwing. The ship was intact with all systems functioning normally. The crew of 12 Krethix warriors had simply vanished. In the captain's quarters, someone had carved a message into the metal wall using what appeared to be a Krethix claw. The message was written in perfect Krethix script, and it said something that made everyone in the room go quiet. You hunt for glory. I hunt for justice. The prey has become the predator. Below the message was a handprint pressed into the wall. Analysis confirmed it was made with Krethix blood, but the print itself was distinctly human. 5 fingers and a thumb with measurements matching an average human female hand. Karen leaned forward and examined the image closely. She had seen combat in the border wars and recognized the signature of someone who knew exactly what they were doing. Nicole pulled up linguistic analysis of the carved message. The grammar was perfect and the word choice was deliberate. Whoever wrote it understood not just the Krethix language but their culture and psychology. The phrase about prey becoming predator would be deeply disturbing to any Krethix who saw it. Their entire civilization was built on the belief that they were the ultimate hunters and could never become the hunted. Danny traced the power signatures from the Bloodwing. Someone had accessed the ship's systems and downloaded data before leaving. They had taken navigation logs and communication records but left everything else untouched. It was professional work done by someone who knew exactly what information they needed. Greg examined the approach vectors and found trace evidence of another ship. It was small and used a modified drive system that mixed human and alien technology. Lisa knew what her team was thinking because she had been thinking it for weeks now. A human was hunting the Krethix, someone with military training and access to classified information about Krethix operations, someone who had a reason to target these hunters specifically. She pulled up a classified file that she had requested from military command. The file contained a list of human personnel who had gone missing in Krethix territory over the past 5 years. There were 32 names on the list. Most were civilian researchers or traders who had been in the wrong place at the wrong time. But one name stood out to Lisa. Lieutenant Amy Brooks had been the commander of a small scout ship called the Wanderer. 2 years ago, the Wanderer had responded to a distress call in the outer territories. The ship had been found weeks later drifting near Krethix space. The crew of 4 were dead, and the ship's logs showed they had been hunted through the corridors for hours before being killed. Krethix trophy hunters had recorded the entire event and kept it as entertainment. Amy Brooks' body had never been recovered. Military command had assumed she died like her crew, but what if she survived? What if she had spent the last 2 years learning everything about the Krethix and planning her revenge? Lisa shared the file with her team and watched their reactions. Paul nodded slowly as pieces fell into place. Karen checked her weapons database for any reports of modified human equipment in the outer territories. Greg calculated flight patterns that would allow someone to track Krethix hunting ships without being detected. Nicole found something interesting in the communication records. Over the past 18 months, there had been scattered reports from prey species about a ghost that saved them from Krethix hunters. The stories were dismissed as myths or mistranslations, but they all described the same thing. A figure in dark armor who appeared when Krethix hunting parties attacked. The figure would disable the hunters and disappear before anyone could get a clear look. Survivors said the ghost left messages for the Krethix in their own language, warning them to stop hunting or face consequences. Danny pulled up engineering reports from salvaged Krethix equipment. Someone had been stealing parts and weapons from disabled Krethix ships. The thefts were surgical and precise, taking only what was needed and leaving no trace. It was the work of someone who understood both human and Krethix technology, well enough to combine them. Lisa made her decision. They would follow the trail and find out if Amy Brooks was alive. If she was hunting the Krethix, then Lisa needed to know why and what her endgame was. The Galactic Council wanted answers about the missing Krethix, and the human government wanted to avoid a diplomatic incident. But Lisa had a different priority. If a human was out there fighting against species that preyed on the defenseless, then Lisa wanted to understand what drove that person. She wanted to know if Amy Brooks was a vigilante or something else entirely. The Horizon's Edge set course for the last known location of Krethix activity, and Lisa prepared her team for what they might find. As they entered hyperspace, Greg asked the question everyone was thinking. If Amy Brooks survived and spent 2 years hunting the Krethix, then what had she become? Was she still the officer who followed rules and protocols, or had she become something darker? Karen suggested they should be ready for anything, because someone who could make trained Krethix warriors disappear was extremely dangerous. Paul reminded them that humans were persistence hunters by nature, and if Amy had adapted that instinct to hunting Krethix, then she would be nearly impossible to stop. Lisa stood at the viewport and watched the stars blur past. She thought about the message carved into the bloodwing. The prey has become the predator. It was a simple statement, but it carried enormous implications. For thousands of years, species across the galaxy had lived in fear of predators like the Krethix. They had accepted their role as prey because they believed they had no choice. But what if one human had decided to change that dynamic? What if Amy Brooks had proven that prey could fight back and win? The galaxy would never be the same. The Horizon's Edge arrived at the coordinates 3 days later, and what they found confirmed Lisa's worst fears. A Krethix hunting vessel called the Shadowfang drifted in a decaying orbit around a small moon. Scans showed the ship was intact with life support still functioning, but there were no life signs aboard. Lisa ordered her team to suit up and prepare for boarding. They approached carefully with weapons ready and sensors sweeping for any threats. The airlock opened smoothly and they entered the Krethix ship. The interior was designed for creatures much larger than humans, so everything felt oversized and threatening. The walls were decorated with hunting trophies from dozens of species. Skulls and hides and weapons taken from victims over years of hunting. Karen moved through the corridors with her weapon raised while Paul scanned for biological traces. Danny checked the ship's systems and found something strange in the power logs. Someone had accessed the main computer and downloaded the entire navigation database along with all communication records. The download had happened 6 hours ago, which meant whoever did it might still be nearby. Nicole found the crew quarters and called the others over. The 12 Krethix warriors who had crewed this ship were gone, but their personal belongings were still here. Their armor hung on racks and their weapons were stored properly. It looked like they had simply walked off the ship and never returned. Greg discovered something in the cargo bay that made everyone stop. There were cages built into the walls designed to hold live captives. Most were empty, but one contained the body of a Peltheran female. She had died recently and the medical scanner showed she had been tortured before death. Paul examined the body and his face went hard. The Krethiks had been hunting Peltherans on the protected world below and keeping captives for sport. This was a direct violation of council law, but the Krethiks rarely faced consequences for such violations. Lisa found the captain's quarters at the end of a long corridor. The door was open, and inside she saw the same message carved into the wall that had been on the Bloodwing. You hunt for glory, I hunt for justice. The prey has become the predator. Below it was another human handprint in Krethik's blood. But this time there was something else. A data chip sat on the captain's desk with a note attached. The note was written in English, and it said simply, "Come alone to the coordinates below if you want answers." Lisa looked at the coordinates and recognized them immediately. They were on the jungle moon orbiting below, the same moon where the Krethiks had been hunting Peltherans. She showed the note to her team, and they argued about what to do. Karen insisted it was a trap and they should call for backup. Paul thought whoever left the note wanted to talk, or they would not have left a message. Greg offered to provide air support from the ship. Danny wanted to analyze the data chip before they did anything else. Nicole plugged the chip into her portable scanner and examined the contents. It was a personal log written by Amy Brooks starting from 2 years ago. The entries detailed everything that had happened after the Wanderer was attacked. Amy had survived by hiding in an escape pod while the Krethiks hunted and killed her crew. She had drifted for days before being picked up by a passing trader. But instead of returning home, she had started following the Krethiks and learning everything about them. The log entries showed a progression from grief to determination to something harder. Amy had tracked the specific Krethiks hunters who killed her crew. She learned their language by intercepting communications. She studied their tactics by observing them from a distance. She discovered their weaknesses by analyzing their biology and psychology. The entries described months of preparation as Amy transformed herself from a victim into something else entirely. One entry from 8 months ago detailed Amy's first intervention. A Krethiks hunting party had cornered a group of Grethian refugees on an abandoned station. Amy had used stolen Krethiks weapons and modified human explosives to disable the hunters. She saved the refugees and left the Krethiks alive but stripped of their equipment and dignity. The entry ended with a simple statement that changed everything for Amy. They felt fear for the first time, and now they know what their prey experiences. Paul read through the tactical analysis Amy had compiled on Krethiks hunting methods. She had broken down their psychological profile and identified key vulnerabilities. Krethiks relied on intimidation and overwhelming force. They expected prey to run or hide. They became confused and angry when prey fought back intelligently. Amy had learned to exploit this by creating situations where Krethiks' advantages became disadvantages. She used their enhanced senses against them with sensory overload. She turned their size into a liability in confined spaces. She made their confidence into a weakness through careful manipulation. Karen examined the weapons data Amy had collected. She had been stealing Krethiks' equipment and reverse engineering it to understand how it worked. Then she combined Krethiks' technology with human innovation to create hybrid tools that were more effective than either alone. There were designs for acoustic weapons that emitted frequencies painful to Krethiks' hearing. There were chemical compounds that disrupted their scent tracking. There were visual camouflage systems that made humans invisible to Krethiks' eyes. Danny found engineering schematics for an entire base hidden somewhere in this system. Amy had built a facility using salvaged parts from multiple ship types. She had power generators and fabrication equipment and enough supplies to operate independently for years. The base was designed to be mobile and could relocate if discovered. It was the work of someone who planned to continue this campaign indefinitely. Greg analyzed the flight logs and found Amy's movement patterns over 18 months. She had visited over 30 systems following Krethiks hunting parties. In each location, she had either prevented hunts or eliminated hunting parties that were targeting protected species. The pattern showed careful selection. Amy only targeted Krethiks who were breaking council law by hunting sentient beings. She avoided Krethiks military vessels and focused exclusively on trophy hunters. Nicole discovered communication intercepts that Amy had been collecting. She had tapped into Krethiks networks and was monitoring their transmissions in real time. She knew where every hunting party was operating and which ones were targeting vulnerable populations. She had become an intelligence network of one person, tracking the movements of an entire predator civilization. The intercepts showed that the Krethiks were aware of her now, and some called her the ghost hunter, while others used a term that translated roughly to the one who reverses the Lisa read the final log entry dated just yesterday. Amy had written about her philosophy and why she was doing this. She explained that the galaxy had accepted predator species like the Krethiks because no one believed they could be stopped. Prey species lived in fear, and predators operated with impunity. But Amy had proven something important. Predators could be beaten using intelligence and preparation. Prey could become predators if they chose to fight back. She wanted other species to see that resistance was possible. The entry ended with a direct message to whoever found the logs. She knew humans would come looking eventually. She knew her actions would cause diplomatic problems. She did not care because she had found a purpose worth any cost. The Krethiks had killed her friends and treated them like animals. Amy would make sure every Krethiks hunter knew that humans remembered their dead and that justice would find them no matter where they hid. Lisa made her decision and told her team she was going down to the moon alone as requested. Karen objected strongly, but Lisa overruled her. If Amy wanted to talk, then Lisa would listen. If Amy wanted to kill her, then having backup would not help against someone who had been eliminating Krethiks warriors for months. Paul agreed to monitor from orbit and be ready to extract Lisa if needed. Greg programmed an emergency beacon into Lisa's suit. Danny copied all of Amy's logs and sent them to a secure archive. They flew down to the jungle moon in a shuttle and landed at the coordinates. Lisa stepped out alone while her team remained in the shuttle with engines running. The jungle was dense with massive trees and thick undergrowth. The air was humid and filled with the sounds of alien wildlife. Lisa activated her scanner and followed a faint trail leading deeper into the forest. She walked for 30 minutes before reaching a small clearing. Amy Brooks stood in the center of the clearing wearing modified armor that combined human and Krethiks elements. Her face was visible and Lisa saw the changes that 2 years had carved into the woman. Amy looked older and harder with scars on her neck and arms. Her eyes held a mixture of determination and something darker that Lisa could not quite identify. They stood facing each other for a long moment before Amy spoke. "You came alone, which means you are either very brave or you understand why I am doing this." Lisa met Amy's eyes and spoke carefully because she knew this conversation would determine everything that followed. She told Amy that she understood the desire for justice after losing people you cared about. She said she had read the logs and knew what the Krethiks had done to Amy's crew. But she also said that hunting sentient beings made Amy no different from the Krethiks themselves. Amy smiled without humor and asked Lisa if she really believed that. She gestured to the jungle around them and explained that the Krethiks had been hunting Peltharans here for 3 weeks before she arrived. Amy described how the Krethiks would take Peltharan children from villages and release them in the jungle for sport. They would give the children a head start and then track them down slowly to make the hunt last longer. The Krethiks recorded everything and shared the recordings with other hunters as entertainment. Amy had intercepted those recordings and decided this hunting party needed to be stopped permanently. She had spent days preparing the jungle and turning it into a trap designed specifically for Krethiks. Psychology and physiology. Lisa asked what happened to the Krethiks crew from the Shadowfang. Amy told her to look up, and Lisa saw movement in the trees above them. The 12 Krethiks warriors hung suspended in nets made from their own ship's cargo rigging. They were alive but unconscious and stripped of their weapons and armor. Amy explained that she had used tranquilizers designed for their specific biology. The Krethiks would wake up in a few hours with no memory of how they were captured. They would find themselves helpless and exposed exactly like their prey always felt. Amy walked to a nearby equipment cache and pulled out a portable display. She showed Lisa footage of the Krethiks hunting Peltharans over the past weeks. The images were difficult to watch. Children running through the jungle in terror while massive predators stalked them for fun. Families torn apart for trophies. Elders killed because they could not run fast enough to make the hunt interesting. Amy said she had saved 43 Peltharans by tracking the Krethiks and intervening before they could complete their hunts. She had evacuated entire villages and hidden the survivors in locations the Krethiks could never find. Lisa asked why Amy had left the Krethiks alive if she hated them so much. Amy explained her philosophy, which had developed over months of hunting the hunters. She said killing them would be too easy and would make her exactly what they accused humans of being. Instead, she wanted the Krethiks to experience what their prey felt. She wanted them to know helplessness and fear. She wanted them to understand that being hunted was not glorious when you were the one running. Most importantly, she wanted survivors to return to the Krethiks' dominion and spread stories about the human who could not be stopped. The psychological warfare was deliberate and calculated. Amy had studied how Krethix culture worked and knew that reputation meant everything to them. By defeating their hunters and leaving them alive but humiliated, she was attacking the foundation of their society. Other Krethix were starting to fear human intervention. Some hunting parties had canceled expeditions because they heard rumors about the ghost hunter. The most arrogant hunters sought her out specifically to prove they could not be beaten. Amy eliminated those hunters first because their disappearance sent the strongest message. Lisa understood the strategy, but questioned whether one human could really change an entire civilization's behavior. Amy pulled up data showing decreased Krethix hunting activity in sectors where she had operated. Hunting parties were avoiding protected worlds, and some Krethix had even started questioning whether trophy hunting was worth the risk. The Dominion leadership was embarrassed and angry, but they could not catch Amy or stop her campaign. She had become a symbol that prey species across the galaxy were starting to rally behind. Amy showed Lisa her next target, which was a Krethix noble named Corvin, who led the most active hunting operation in this sector. Corvin commanded a fleet of 12 ships and had killed over 500 sentient beings from 20 different species. He considered himself untouchable because of his family connections and military protection. Amy had been tracking him for 3 months and had finally found a pattern in his movements. Corvin was planning a massive hunt on a world inhabited by the Therian people who had no weapons beyond primitive tools. Lisa listened as Amy described her plan to stop Corvin. She had infiltrated his supply network and knew when his fleet would arrive at the Therian homeworld. She planned to warn the Therian and help them evacuate to hidden locations. Then she would use the empty villages as a killing ground where every advantage belonged to her instead of the hunters. She had already positioned equipment caches and prepared traps throughout the region. When Corvin's hunters arrived, expecting easy prey, they would find themselves in a nightmare designed by someone who understood them better than they understood themselves. The plan was brilliant and terrifying in its scope. Amy had thought through every detail and accounted for Krethix tactics and responses. She had backup plans and contingencies for scenarios Lisa had not even considered. This was not the work of someone driven by rage or revenge. This was professional military planning applied with surgical precision against a specific target. Amy had transformed herself into exactly what the Krethix feared most, which was intelligent prey that refused to run. Lisa asked the question that had been bothering her since she read the logs. How long did Amy plan to continue this campaign? Amy looked at her with tired eyes and said until the Krethix stopped hunting sentient beings or until she was killed. She had no illusions about survival. Eventually the Krethix would adapt or get lucky, or she would make a mistake. But every day she operated was another day that prey species had hope. Every hunter she stopped was dozens or hundreds of lives saved. She had found purpose in this mission and nothing else mattered anymore. Lisa made a decision that surprised both of them. She offered to help Amy with her operation against Corvin. She said her team had skills and resources that could make the mission more effective. Amy was suspicious and asked why Lisa would risk her career and possibly her life for this. Lisa explained that she had joined the military to protect people who could not protect themselves. The Krethix had been violating council law for decades and no one had stopped them, because everyone was afraid. If one human had proven that fear was a choice, then Lisa wanted to be part of showing the galaxy that humanity stood for something. Amy considered the offer carefully. She had been working alone for so long that accepting help felt strange and dangerous, but she recognized that Lisa was sincere, and her team had capabilities that could significantly improve success rates. She agreed to coordinate with Lisa on the Corvin operation under specific conditions. Lisa would not report Amy's location to the Council or Human Command. Her team would follow Amy's tactical plans without question. If the mission went wrong, Lisa would not try to save Amy, but would focus on protecting the Therian people. They spent the next hours reviewing plans and integrating Lisa's team resources into Amy's operation. Paul would provide biological analysis of Krethix forces to identify specific vulnerabilities. Karen would help position and calibrate weapon systems. Greg would provide aerial reconnaissance and emergency extraction if needed. Nicole would monitor Krethix communications and provide real-time intelligence. Danny would ensure all the technical systems functioned perfectly under hostile conditions. Together they formed a unit that combined military training with Amy's specialized knowledge of hunting the hunters. Amy led Lisa back through the jungle to where her base was hidden. The facility was impressive considering she had built it alone from salvaged materials. It had living quarters and workshop space and a command center filled with displays showing Krethix movements across multiple sectors. Lisa saw the scope of what Amy had been doing and realized this was bigger than stopping individual hunting parties. Amy was building a network and gathering intelligence that could protect vulnerable species across the entire region. They discussed how to evacuate the Therion without causing panic or alerting Corvin's scouts. Amy had already made contact with Therion leaders through careful observation and simple gifts that showed peaceful intent. The Therion were intelligent but had no concept of space travel or alien threats. Amy had used translation devices and visual aids to explain the danger coming and the need to hide. Most Therion trusted her because she had helped them during a natural disaster weeks earlier. Lisa suggested using her ship's sensors to map cave systems where the Therion could shelter safely. As they planned, Lisa asked Amy the question she had carved into Krethix's ships. "And how many pursued you back?" Amy explained that it was meant to make the Krethix think about something they never considered. In their entire history as apex predators, they had never been hunted themselves. They had never experienced the terror of being tracked and knowing death was coming. By asking that question, Amy forced them to confront the reality that they had become prey. Some Krethix could not handle that psychological reversal and it broke them. Others grew angry and reckless, which made them easier targets. Lisa understood then that Amy had weaponized empathy in a way that was more effective than any gun. She was making the Krethix feel what their victims felt. She was teaching them through direct experience that hunting sentient beings created suffering. Some Krethix might never learn that lesson, but enough were starting to question their culture that change was becoming possible. Amy had started something that could reshape the balance of power in the galaxy if it succeeded. The operation against Corvin began 3 days later, when his fleet arrived at the Therion homeworld. Lisa's team had spent those days working with Amy to prepare everything. They had helped evacuate 2,000 Therion to cave systems that Greg mapped using orbital sensors. The caves were deep enough that Krethix scanners could not detect life signs inside. Amy had stocked them with food and water and simple lighting that the Therion could understand. Nicole had recorded messages in Therion language explaining they needed to stay hidden until the danger passed. Paul studied the biology of Corvin's specific subspecies of Krethix and found useful information. This bloodline had enhanced thermal vision, but reduced hearing in certain frequency ranges. Amy incorporated that into her trap designs by creating heat signatures that would confuse their targeting while using sound as her primary weapon. Karen modified human sonic devices to emit pulses that would be painful and disorienting to Corvin's subspecies. The weapons were non-lethal, but would make the Krethix vulnerable and afraid. Danny rigged the abandoned Therion villages with sensors that would track Krethix movements and feed data to Amy's command center. Every building and path had monitoring equipment disguised as natural objects. When the hunters entered the villages, they would be walking into an observation network that gave Amy perfect information about their locations and actions. She would know what they were doing before they knew themselves. Greg positioned atmospheric drones high above the clouds where Krethix sensors would mistake them for weather patterns. Corvin's 12 ships landed in a valley near the largest Therion settlement. His forces numbered 60 Krethix warriors wearing ceremonial hunting armor. They carried plasma weapons and tracking equipment designed to follow fleeing prey across any terrain. Corvin himself was massive even by Krethix standards, standing nearly 9 feet tall with scales that showed his noble bloodline. He addressed his hunters in their language and Nicole translated from orbit. Corvin promised his warriors that this hunt would be remembered for generations because the Therion were numerous and helpless. The Krethix spread out and entered the settlement expecting to find thousands of Therion going about their daily lives. Instead, they found empty buildings and cold cooking fires. Corvin was confused and then angry. He ordered his hunters to search the surrounding area and find where the prey had gone. The Krethix moved through the village in teams of 5, checking every structure and looking for tracks. They did not realize that every step took them deeper into Amy's trap. Amy watched from a concealed position 2 kilometers away. Her display showed the location of every Krethix warrior, and she coordinated her response through secure communications with Lisa's team. She had divided Corvin's force into manageable groups by leaving false trails that led in different directions. Each group thought they were tracking Therion survivors. In reality, they were being separated and guided into kill zones that Amy had prepared over weeks of work. The first team of 5 Krethiks followed tracks into a forested area where Amy had set up her opening move. As they entered the trees, Karen activated sonic emitters hidden in the branches. The sound was inaudible to humans, but to Corvin's subspecies it was agony. The Krethiks warriors dropped their weapons and clutched their heads. Amy emerged from concealment wearing armor that made her invisible to their thermal vision. She used tranquilizer darts designed by Paul to drop each warrior in seconds. Within 3 minutes, all 5 were unconscious and bound. The second team discovered their missing companions and called for backup. Corvin ordered 3 more teams to converge on the location. This was exactly what Amy wanted, because it drew the Krethiks away from their ships and support systems. As the teams moved through the terrain, they triggered sensors that activated more sonic devices. The forest became a maze of pain and confusion. Krethiks warriors who prided themselves on superior senses found those same senses turned into weapons against them. Greg used the atmospheric drones to create false thermal signatures that looked like fleeing Therion. The Krethiks chased these ghosts while Amy picked them off one by one. She moved through their formations like smoke striking from unexpected angles and disappearing before they could respond. She used their size against them in dense vegetation where they could not maneuver effectively. She exploited their pack mentality by removing team leaders first, which caused confusion among the others. Paul monitored Krethiks' stress levels through biosensors and reported that many warriors were experiencing fear responses they had never felt before. This was new for them because Krethiks were always the ones causing fear, not experiencing it. Some warriors wanted to retreat to the ships, but Corvin refused to allow it. He was too proud to admit that his hunt was failing. He ordered his remaining forces to form a defensive position and wait for the prey to reveal itself. Amy decided it was time to confront Corvin directly. She had spent weeks studying his personality and knew he would respond to a personal challenge. She used Nicole's communication equipment to broadcast a message in perfect Krethiks directly to Corvin's communicator. She told him that his warriors were beaten and his hunt was over. She offered him a choice between retreating peacefully or being treated like the prey he had hunted for so many years. She ended the message with her signature question, "And how many pursued you back?" Corvin exploded in rage and ordered his warriors to find and kill the human. He led 20 remaining Krethiks in a charge toward Amy's last known position. They moved as a unified force, believing their numbers would overwhelm any single opponent. But Amy had prepared for exactly this response. She led them into a canyon where Danny had rigged the walls with explosives that would not kill, but would trap. As the Krethiks entered the canyon, Amy triggered the charges. Rock and debris fell behind the Krethiks, cutting off their retreat. More charges ahead blocked their advance. They were trapped in a space designed to neutralize their advantages. The canyon walls were too high to climb and too narrow for their ships to extract them. Amy appeared on the rim above them with Lisa and her team beside her. Corvin looked up and saw humans standing where prey should never be. He demanded to know what gave them the right to interfere with Krethiks' traditions. Lisa answered him in Krethiks language. She said that hunting sentient beings was not a tradition worth preserving. She said that every species in the galaxy had the right to exist without fear of being killed for sport. She said that humans would not stand by while predators like the Krethiks terrorized defenseless people. She told Corvin that his hunt was finished and he would face consequences for violating council law. Amy added her own message. She told Corvin that she had eliminated over 40 hunting parties in the past year. She said she had saved hundreds of lives from Krethiks who thought themselves untouchable. She explained that she would continue hunting hunters until the Dominion stopped treating sentient beings as prey. She said the galaxy was changing and predators who refused to change with it would be left behind. Then she asked him again, "And how many pursued you back?" Corvin had no answer because no one had ever pursued him. He had spent decades as the hunter, never considering what it meant to be hunted. Now he stood trapped and helpless while his prey lectured him about justice. The psychological impact was devastating. Other Krethiks warriors in the canyon showed signs of breaking down. Some sat on the ground and stopped responding. Others became aggressive and had to be tranquilized. Amy had proven her point more effectively than any violence could. Lisa contacted the Galactic Council and reported that she had captured a Krethiks noble and his warriors, conducting illegal hunts on a protected world. She provided evidence of their crimes, including recordings of previous hunts where they had killed Therion for sport. She demanded that the council send peacekeepers to take custody of the prisoners and begin formal proceedings against the Krethiks Dominion. The council was forced to respond because Lisa had documented everything perfectly. Amy watched as council ships arrived and took custody of Corvin and his warriors. She knew this was a turning point, because for the first time in history a Krethix noble would face justice for hunting crimes. The precedent would change everything. Other prey species would see that resistance was possible, and predators could be held accountable. The balance of power in the galaxy was shifting, but Amy also knew the Krethix would not accept this defeat quietly. Corvin's family was powerful and they would demand revenge. The Dominion would be forced to respond or lose face. Amy told Lisa that things were about to get more dangerous because the Krethix would send their best hunters after her specifically. Lisa said her team would stand with Amy because what they had started was too important to abandon. They had proven that humans could protect the defenseless even against impossible odds. As the council ships departed with their prisoners, Amy stood looking at the Therian settlement. The people were emerging from the caves and returning to their homes. They had no idea how close they came to being hunted. Amy had given them safety, but she knew other species and other systems were not so fortunate. She made a decision that would define everything that followed. She would not hide anymore. She would make her campaign public and invite other prey species to join her. Amy made her decision and contacted news networks across the galaxy. She released all her logs and evidence of Krethix hunting crimes to every major media outlet. Within hours, the story spread to hundreds of worlds. Species that had lived in fear of predators saw proof that resistance was possible. The recordings showed Amy defeating Krethix warriors and protecting vulnerable populations. The evidence of illegal hunts forced the Galactic Council to acknowledge what they had ignored for decades. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Prey species across the galaxy demanded action against the Krethix Dominion. Representatives from dozens of civilizations stood before the council and shared their own stories of Krethix atrocities. The Peltheran delegation showed images of children who had been hunted. The Therian leaders displayed evidence of planned genocide disguised as sport. The Grethian collective presented data showing centuries of Krethix, violations that the council had overlooked, because no one wanted to confront the predators. The Krethix Dominion sent their ambassador to defend their culture and traditions. Ambassador Velcris stood before the council and declared that hunting was sacred to Krethix identity. He claimed that humans had no right to interfere with activities that had been practiced for thousands of years. He demanded that Amy be turned over for execution and that humanity be sanctioned for her crimes. The chamber erupted in arguments as prey species shouted down the Krethix claims. Lisa testified about what she had witnessed during the Corvin operation. She described finding Peltheran bodies in Krethix cargo holds. She presented recordings of hunting parties targeting children because they could not defend themselves. She showed evidence that the Krethix knew their hunts violated council law, but continued anyway because enforcement was weak. Her testimony was calm and factual, which made it more damaging than any emotional appeal could have been. Paul provided scientific analysis, showing that Krethix hunting caused psychological trauma across entire species. He presented studies of populations that had been repeatedly targeted by hunters. The data showed increased anxiety and decreased birth rates and social breakdown. He argued that allowing such hunts was enabling genocide through cultural destruction. The council could not ignore evidence presented by a respected xenobiologist. The council debated for 3 days while protests grew outside their chambers. Prey species demanded protection, and predator species defended their traditional practices. Human delegates tried to distance themselves from Amy's actions, while privately admitting she had accomplished what diplomacy never could. The galaxy watched and waited to see if the council would enforce laws they had written, but never applied to powerful predator species. On the 4th day, the Krethix made a move that changed everything. The Dominion sent their greatest hunter to challenge Amy directly. His name was Scarex, and he had never failed a hunt in 40 years. He was a legend among the Krethix, who specialized in hunting the most dangerous prey across the galaxy. Scarex issued a formal challenge through every communication network. He would hunt Amy on neutral ground with observers from all species watching. If he won, the Krethix would be vindicated. If Amy won, the Dominion would accept council oversight of their hunting practices. Amy accepted the challenge immediately, despite Lisa's objections. She knew this was bigger than one hunt. The entire galaxy would watch, and the outcome would determine whether prey species continued to live in fear or started fighting back. She had spent 2 years proving that humans could hunt the hunters. Now she would demonstrate it before witnesses who could not deny what they saw. The council selected a moon with diverse terrain for the hunt. There were forests and mountains and plains and water features. Both hunter and prey would have equal opportunity to use the environment. Observers from 50 species established monitoring stations in orbit. Cameras were positioned to capture everything without interfering. The rules were simple, and both parties would start unarmed and could use only what they found or made from the environment. Lisa and her team were not allowed on the surface, but they monitored from orbit with millions of others. Greg tracked both Amy and Scarex through the sensor network. Nicole translated Krethix commentary as their people watched their greatest hunter prepare. Karen analyzed the terrain and identified locations where Amy might establish advantages. Danny mapped resource locations and calculated probable paths. Paul studied Scarex's history and found patterns in his hunting style. The hunt began at dawn, and Scarex moved with confidence that came from decades of success. He was larger and stronger than Amy, with natural weapons and enhanced senses. He tracked her initial trail and followed it into forested terrain where his thermal vision would be most effective. He expected Amy to run and hide like prey always did. He was wrong. Amy had spent the night before the hunt preparing the forest. She created false trails and set up observation points. She gathered materials for tools and identified water sources and defensible positions. She knew Scarex's reputation and had studied recordings of his previous hunts. She understood his tactics better than he understood hers, because she had learned to think like a Krethix while he had never considered prey that thought back. The first day passed with Scarex following Amy's trail and growing frustrated. She stayed ahead of him, but left signs that she was tiring and making mistakes. Scarex believed he was wearing her down through persistence. The observers watched, and many assumed the Krethix would win through superior endurance. But Lisa recognized Amy's strategy because she had seen it before. Amy was leading Scarex exactly where she wanted him while learning his patterns. On the second day, Amy changed tactics and started hunting Scarex instead of running. She used the terrain to mask her movements and appeared in unexpected locations. She threw rocks to create sounds that drew him into difficult terrain. She used plant materials to create scents that confused his tracking. Scarex realized he was no longer chasing prey but was being manipulated. The psychological shift was visible even from orbit. Paul noted that Scarex's movement patterns showed increasing stress. The great hunter was experiencing something new, and it affected his decision-making. He started making mistakes and taking risks he would normally avoid. Amy exploited every error and widened her advantage. By the end of the second day, Scarex was exhausted and disoriented, while Amy appeared fresh and in control. The third day began with Amy appearing openly and speaking to Scarex in his own language. She told him he had hunted for glory, but she hunted for justice. She said he had never faced prey that refused to be prey. She explained that intelligence and preparation could defeat physical advantages. Then she asked the question that had become her signature. "And how many pursued you back?" Scarex charged in rage, and Amy led him into a trap she had spent days preparing. She had weakened a cliff edge and positioned herself so that Scarex's charge would take him over it. He fell 20 feet into water deep enough to cushion his landing, but not deep enough to escape easily. Amy stood above him with a spear she had made from wood and stone. She could have killed him, but instead she offered him the same choice she gave all Krethix hunters: admit defeat and live, or continue fighting and lose everything, including dignity. Scarex looked up at the human who had beaten him, and for the first time in his life, understood what his prey had always felt. He was helpless and at the mercy of someone he had underestimated. He admitted defeat in front of billions of witnesses. The galaxy watched as the greatest Krethix hunter surrendered to a single human who weighed half what he did and had none of his natural advantages. The implications spread like fire across every civilized world. Prey species celebrated and began organizing their own defense forces. Predator species faced questions about traditions built on causing suffering. The Krethix Dominion had no choice but to accept council oversight and restrictions on hunting sentient beings. Scarex returned home changed by the experience, and some said he began teaching other Krethix that hunting required respecting prey as equals. Amy became a symbol that transcended species and politics. She founded an organization dedicated to teaching prey species how to defend themselves against predators. Lisa and her team joined officially and brought military resources to support the mission. Within a year, they had trained defense forces for 20 species. Within 5 years, over 100 civilizations had learned techniques for countering predator tactics. The Krethiks adapted slowly, and some never accepted the changes. A few hunting parties still operated illegally, and Amy continued tracking them down. But the culture was shifting as younger Krethiks questioned traditions their parents never examined. Some began hunting only non-sentient animals. Others abandoned hunting entirely and found purpose in different pursuits. The Dominion remained powerful but no longer operated with impunity. Paul published research showing that species which learned to defend themselves developed stronger cultures and higher confidence. The psychological impact of refusing victimhood transformed entire civilizations. Karen developed weapons and tactics that allowed physically weaker species to counter stronger predators. Greg trained pilots from dozens of worlds in defensive flying. Nicole created communication networks that warned vulnerable populations when predators approached. Danny designed early warning systems that even primitive species could maintain. 10 years after Amy first started hunting the hunters, the galaxy was fundamentally different. Predator species still existed, but they no longer terrorized others without consequence. Prey species no longer accepted fear as their natural state. The balance of power had shifted not through violence but through the simple act of one human refusing to be prey and teaching others to do the same. Lisa eventually retired from active missions but continued advising the organization Amy built. She often thought about the moment in the jungle when Amy asked if she understood why this mattered. Lisa had learned that understanding was not enough. Action was required even when the cost was high. She had watched Amy transform from a victim into a defender, and then into a teacher who changed the galaxy. Amy never stopped her work. She trained new generations and investigated reports of predator activity, and responded when vulnerable species needed help. She carried scars from dozens of encounters and never spoke much about what drove her forward. But everyone who worked with her knew the answer. She remembered her crew and every other person who died because no one stood up to predators. She had asked the galaxy one question and forced everyone to answer. And how many pursued you back? The answer now was countless prey who refused that role and predators who learned to respect all life.